Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, day 2 of a tense truce in Sudan, and war-torn communities are still waiting for the hoped-for ramped-up aid. Also, Senegal's in for a tense wait for the verdict in the rape trial of opposition leader Ousmane Sonko. The case has gripped the nation with its lurid testimony. And decades of conflict and shoddy infrastructures left Central African Republic with a thoroughly unreliable power grid. Only 10% of the population has access to electricity. But first, more than 1.3 million people have been forced from their homes by weeks of fighting between Sudan's army and the RSF paramilitary. Despite the latest ceasefire, there was still sporadic fighting on Wednesday, although overall it does seem to be holding up. Wednesday also saw the UN envoy for sexual violence raise concerns about the use of rape as a weapon of war. The conflicts also exacerbated the already dire humanitarian conditions in the country.
Khadija has been in Chad for just 6 days. Like countless others, she decided to head west as the situation back in Sudan continues to deteriorate.
My children and I walked for 3 days to get here. It was a very difficult journey. People were being attacked and blocked from crossing the border.
Several of her relatives are stuck on the Sudanese side of the border. She says she doesn't know if they're alive or dead. According to the International Organization for Migration, around 80,000 people have sought refuge in Chad since hostilities broke out in mid-April. Aid workers are struggling to cope.
25,000 people, more than 25,000 people who are here in Bogota, dire needs in water, need in healthcare, need in shelter, and we have to race against the rainy season that is coming to provide the assistance that is required.
Security is also a concern. Last week, at least one refugee was killed by a rocket strike on a camp in Kufrun, around 100 kilometers north of Baroda. Witnesses said that the rocket was fired at people who were fleeing into Chad. In response, local authorities in the country said they're working to boost security at the border. In the Sudanese capital Khartoum, smoke rose into the sky on Wednesday, 2 days after a new truce came into effect. Civilians are still waiting for humanitarian corridors to open.
Well, earlier I spoke to Alyona Sinenko, the regional spokesperson for the ICRC, and I asked her whether this latest ceasefire in Sudan had yet had much impact in ramping up humanitarian deliverance.
We are delivering assistance to the Ministry of Health. We have managed to deliver them the surgical supplies, and they have started delivering those supplies to hospitals in Khartoum. And the situation in hospitals have been so dire that, yes, it is a big step. But then at the same time, if you look at the sheer scale of the needs in the country, of course, much more needs to be done to respond to them.
And what, considering the scale, are your priorities at the moment?
The number one priority for us is health, and also other essential services like water and electricity, because fighting was taking place in a city, in a heavily populated urban areas, and people living in these places, they depend heavily on these fragile systems, and now they have been going for weeks without water and electricity, and most importantly without healthcare. According to our estimates, some 80% of hospitals in Khartoum are not functioning, and those that are still functioning, it is very urgent to provide them the support that they need.
And what about your workers themselves? Are they safe as they go about their work?
We are in touch with all the parties to the conflict, and of course every movement is closely coordinated, and we take the security and safety of our personnel very seriously. But it is a very volatile and difficult environment to work in. So yes, now the ceasefire is largely holding, and it's an enormously positive step. But there are numerous other challenges we are facing, just general lawlessness. The lootings have been widespread. So yes, they have been well and safe, but the situation remains extremely difficult for them.
Alyona Sinenko there from the ICRC. Now, on Wednesday, Senegal's public prosecutor, Abdou Karim Diop, called for a 10-year prison sentence in the rape trial of opposition leader Ousmane Sonko. Diop also called for a separate 5-year jail term, accusing Sonko of corrupting the youth. Either sentence would legally tank Sonko's prospects of contesting next year's elections. Sam Bradpeace has more.
Ousmane Sonko's alleged victim, a young beauty salon employee called Adji Sarr, was vilified in the Senegalese press on Wednesday morning. The day before, she had given testimony at the tribunal in which she described, some might say quite courageously and in graphic detail, the number of occasions on which she said she was raped by the Senegalese opposition leader. In response, the newspapers have since branded her, and I quote, a porn star. Meanwhile, when it comes to the 10-year sentence for Ousmane Sonko requested by the state prosecutor, feelings on the streets of Senegal are very much mixed.
I see that this trial has been a farce from the beginning. They have not respected any stage of the legal proceedings. Ousmane Sonko should not be convicted because he is innocent and they have no evidence against him. Macky Sall has to stop this cabal against Ousmane Sonko. That is the truth. We are tired.
Macky Sall moo nar a bàyyi lu muy def Macky Sall gars dañoo sonn si moom na bàyyi lu muy def.
Parce que loolu yëpp pour Sonko parce que Sonko tey bu taxawoon nee ma.
If Sonko had abandoned his bid to run in the 2024 presidential election, the state would have dropped the charges against him. How many opponents are there in Senegal? But he's the only one to be persecuted because he gives people hope.
A decision on this case isn't expected until June 1st, and until then, Senegal is holding its breath. It's difficult to see how a guilty verdict for Mr. Sonko would go down lightly with his supporters.
Nigerian Afrobeat star Sean Kuti will be able to head out on tour after all, after he was released on bail on Wednesday. His departure had been held up after he'd been arrested a week ago following an alleged assault on a police officer in Lagos. The case has been adjourned until July the 3rd. And DR Congo is planning to boost its stake in a cobalt and copper joint venture with Chinese firms. Kinshasa currently gets a little over 30% of the deal, but wants that more than doubled. Rejigging the lopsided pact will be at the top of the agenda when President Felix Tshisekedi heads to China for a 5-day visit later this week. Our correspondent in Beijing, Yana Li, brings us more.
His first state visit to China, President Felix Tshisekedi is expected to push for new terms on an infrastructure for minerals deal. Now, that deal was signed back in 2008, long before he entered office. It's worth more than $6 billion US, and the idea behind it was to bring more roads and more hospitals to the country in exchange for access for Chinese firms to Congolese cobalt and copper. Now, at the time, it was dubbed the deal of the century, but for the current president, this deal was quote-unquote poorly negotiated. In fact, a state auditor published a report just back in February, and in it said that the Chinese side should cough up an extra $17 billion for that deal to be considered fair for both sides. Fast forward a few months to now, to this week, President Tshisekedi is expected to sit down with his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping, on Friday. The two are to sign several bilateral deals, including something perhaps on this minerals deal. The details have yet to be released on what each side has managed to negotiate so far. But of course, this visit isn't just about rare metals in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The two sides are also talking about defense and technology. For example, we know that the Congolese side, Kinshasa, has been buying more and more Chinese drones, more and more Chinese fighter jets, and President Tshisekedi is also scheduled to visit the economic capital of Shanghai and the tech capital of Shenzhen later on this week.
Oh, yeah, they're on a very windy vantage point in Beijing. Now, people in Bangui, Central African Republic, often can't count on getting through a day with a reliable power supply. Businesses struggle and homes are plunged into darkness because of an energy shortfall that means that sometimes there's only electricity for about 8 hours a day. Poorer neighborhoods are particularly badly hit. Our correspondent tells us more.
It is 10 o'clock in the Benzvi district. Like every morning, and yes, it's getting ready for work. For 2 years now, to support herself and her family, she has been selling iced water. And to prepare her goods, she only needs water, plastic bags, and electricity to freeze them. But for some time, her professional activity has been threatened.
In my old neighborhood, I had electricity 24 hours a day and my business flourished. After my husband died, I moved here. We only have 3 hours of electricity a day, and sometimes power doesn't even come for 2, 3, or 4 days. I am completely stuck.
For the past 10 years, Bangui and its suburbs have been powered by 2 hydroelectric plants located in the north of the capital, providing an average of 8 hours of electricity per day.
If we have electricity at 1 p.m., it cuts at 9 p.m. This has a negative impact on our work, and we lose the confidence of our customers.
To meet this demand, a solar power plant has been built in Sakai, south of Bangui. This plant was opened on March 27 this year.
In Central African Republic, we have a total of 72 megawatts for now. We have projects for mini hybrid power plants in the towns of Berberati, Bosambele, Bambari, and Boar. Within 3 months, these plants will be operational.
A small industrial evolution for these artisans, both formal and informal, which will also benefit the inhabitants of Zongo, a Congolese town located opposite Bangui. 3 pylons are being built on the Obangi River to interconnect the cities of Bangui and Zongo.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.
Under Turkish dominance, Northern Cyprus universities draw over 50,000 students from across the world, representing a very lucrative market. But the system is exploited by agents who promise dream schemes to attract clients.
They lie for monetary gains.
False promises including easy housing, low cost of living, abundance of jobs, and even a passage into Europe.
I don't think this island will be very, very hard like this. I thought this island would be bed of roses, like others saying.
Stuck with nowhere to go, without contacts or money, the dream quickly turns to a nightmare. France 24 observers bring you reporters in Northern Cyprus on France 24 and France24.com.